In my previous video, I did my top 5 best drivers of the 2025 season. If you have not seen that video, then definitely do go and check it out after you've seen this one, of course. But now it's time to do my top 5 worst drivers of the 2025 season. Now, this list is always a little bit more difficult in my opinion to put together because it's not that some of these drivers are bad, but you have to come up with 5 names to put on this list. And yeah, some drivers just had a worse season than others. So yeah, as always, let me know all of your thoughts in the comments box down below, including your top 5 worst drivers of the season as well. But let's get into it. And now coming in at number 5, I have got Lance Stroll, someone who has been on these lists probably since I started doing these videos. And do not get me wrong, Lance Stroll has had, relatively speaking, a better season, I think, than he has in the past, but you always have to remember that Lance Stroll is quite literally one of the most experienced drivers, not on the grid, in Formula 1 history. He made his debut back in 2017. However, when you look at how he's performing up against a 42, 43-year-old Fernando Alonso, it just is not good enough. Now, granted, at the beginning of the season when Fernando was having a bit of a rough patch, he had some reliability issues, Lance Stroll was scoring some points. However, as the season progressed, it's gone back to being, just domination by Fernando Alonso. And once again, it's just not good enough from Lance Stroll, from a driver who is now part of a factory team, a team that wants to win championships in the future. And I mean, when you look at the stats, even though he has actually scored a decent amount of points, 33 points over the course of the 25 season, that kind of equates to 37% of the team's total points. That's not really that great, especially again for a driver of his experience. If he's going to be the second driver to a championship winning team, he has got to be doing better than that. And especially when you look at the head-to-heads, if anything this season, Fernando has actually extended his gap over Lance Stroll, which is just crazy, even though in the races it was fairly close. And again, I think that's more down to perhaps a little bit of bad luck on Fernando's part. In qualifying, to be honest, it's a bit of an embarrassment for Lance Stroll because he was whitewashed. 0-24 by Fernando Alonso. He never outqualified Fernando for a Grand Prix qualifying for a single time this season, which to me again is just ridiculous for a driver of his experience. And even when you look at the average gap, it's not been even close. I mean, Fernando has outqualified Lance by almost 4/10, which is one of the biggest gaps over the course, especially for full-time teammates. The Red Bull drivers are a bit of a kind of strange occurrence because it's been a bit choppy there, but yeah, it has been, in my opinion, another poor season from Lance Stroll. And even though it's not been, a horrific season, for a driver of his experience, for someone who is so established in that team up against such an older driver who is, Fernando is still a very good driver, but he is declining a little bit, it's just not good enough from Lance Stroll. And next up in 4th place is a little bit of a tricky one, and that is Liam Lawson. Now, let's talk about his time at Red Bull really quickly, because you can see when it comes to the average qualifying gap, there is 2 numbers, and of course, that's one during his time at Red Bull, or his very brief time at Red Bull, and one during his time at RB. Now, up against Max, it was scary. It was bad. It was a mistake to put him in. I said even in 2024 that I do not understand how you put Lawson ahead of Tsunoda. I still think, despite how it ended with Yuki, that he should have had the entire preseason. He should not have been passed over for Liam in the first place, but that's neither here nor there. It was a horrible time at Red Bull. So yeah, kind of the less said about that, the better. But the problem is that even once Lawson was then in the RB, which we know is actually a very good car this season. I mean, Hadjar was undoubtedly the rookie of the season, scored a podium in that car, and especially compared to the Red Bull, it was just a much more easier car to drive. I mean, from Yuki to Liam to Hadjar, all of them were able to score kind of points in it. It was clearly a much more drivable car compared to the Red Bull, so we'll see how Hadjar gets along at Red Bull next season. But Liam then still got beat by a rookie. He was extremely familiar with that team. He wasn't even out of that team for that often, and he was kind of soundly beaten by a rookie, Isaac Hadjar. Don't get me wrong, Liam kind of started, he kind of started scoring some points during the course of the season, scored over 41% of the team's points, which is actually not too bad, had quite a few DNFs in that time as well. But it's the fact that he got beaten by a rookie in a team that he had been at before with clearly a very good car that I think is a little bit worrying. On average, he was just under 2/10 slower than Hadjar in qualifying, and Hadjar kind of, soundly beat him. It's not as if Liam was embarrassed in that team, but I did expect a little bit more, despite the very tricky start to the season. Clearly, mentally, that would have been very tough to bounce back from, but just like Yuki, he would have had enough races, in my opinion, had he really lived up to his potential to outperform Hadjar, and it was the opposite. Hadjar soundly beat Lawson, and again, for a driver of his experience, I just think that it should have been a lot closer between him and Isaac Hadjar in the RB. And next up in 3rd place, I have got Franco Colapinto. Now, yet again, it's very difficult to judge drivers in what was undoubtedly the worst car on the grid in 2025. The Alpine was awful. I think, clearly the team wants to move on from that Renault power unit as quickly as possible and go into their Mercedes era. Obviously, given how bad the car was, Franco wasn't able to score points. He did come close a few times. And again, it was kind of weird circumstances, the way he started the year in that team, because obviously he wasn't the driver that started at the beginning of the year, but we always knew that the fact that Briatore brought him into the team when he was never part of the Alpine stable, he was always going to get into that seat at some point during the season. And there is no doubt that whilst it was a bit of a shaky start at the beginning with a few crashes, a few kind of, rough races there and there, he definitely improved as the season progressed. Now, although some people might find it harsh that I've put Colapinto in third, I don't think Colapinto had a horrific season. It's very difficult to put, anyone else kind of above Colapinto because he didn't score any points, but he didn't get the opportunity really to score any points in that car as well, albeit, Gasly did score a few in the Alpine, so it's just very tricky to kind of judge Franco's season. But what I will say is that he definitely kind of secured that seat, at the end of the year. If you actually look at his progression up against Gasly, he did get a lot closer as the year progressed. Or when you look at the head-to-head, given that he wasn't in that car at the beginning of the year, he didn't have the preseason, he wasn't fully kind of familiar with the team, it did take him a few races to kind of, get his foot under the desk. But to be fair, as the year progressed, he did get a lot closer to Pierre Gasly. I think Pierre still kind of, thoroughly was able to kind of, beat him in the end. But especially when you look at that qualifying gap, on average, just over 0.3, that's not great. But again, I think there's a lot of positive signs for Franco, especially going into next year. And hopefully they are able to give him a car that he can actually score points with. Because we saw last year in the Williams that although he was a little bit crash prone, he is still a very fast driver, and on his day he can score points. So yeah, Franco was not given the equipment I think this season to really perform, but again, someone had to go third, and whilst he didn't have a bad season, it wasn't exactly, there's not a lot of things that I can kind of praise him for when it comes to 2025. And next up in second place, we have Yuki Tsunoda. And this one hurts me because, as some of you guys might know, I am a big Yuki Tsunoda fan. And oh boy, it is just rinse, repeat yet again. It was a rough season. I mean, do you really need me to show you the stats to know that? I think if you watch this season, you will know that it was a rough one for Yuki. He scored 33 points. I should say only 33. Like, in an RB, that would not be, too bad. But yeah, he scored 33 points in a car that finished just 2 points off the World Championship. Contributed just 7% of the total points. That is so bad. And yeah, those head-to-heads, I'm not going to read them. That's absolutely horrific. Of course, over the course of, two different teams, he was just under 0.2 faster than Isaac Hadjar at the beginning of the season. And then he wasn't that much better than Liam Lawson in the Red Bull, just over 0.7 over the course of his time being teammates with Max. Now, it's very difficult to talk about the whole Yuki Tsunoda Red Bull situation because it's a story that we have seen many, many times. We saw it with Gasly. Gasly is not a bad driver. We saw it with Alex Albon. Alex Albon is not a bad driver. And we saw it with Sergio Perez. And we know that Perez is not a bad driver. So yeah, it's kind of rinse, repeat. In Yuki's defense, I do think that for a lot of the season, he wasn't on the same spec as Max Verstappen, and because of how hard Red Bull were chasing McLaren, they were bringing upgrades pretty much throughout the season, and of course, when they only had one set of upgrades, it was always going to go to Max, and rightly so. But Yuki also didn't help himself with some of the crashes because it put the team back in terms of what they had to basically remake parts before they could give Yuki the new one. So yeah, Yuki kind of didn't help himself there, but where I will defend him on, and again, his performances were inexcusable. Too many Q1 exits, too many Q2 exits, not enough points scored. But where I will defend him is that it's unbelievable how Max Verstappen can have this kind of perfect team around him where everything goes well, but when I watched Yuki and his team towards the latter half of the season, there was just some ridiculous moments from Red Bull, like in Austin where they didn't bring him out in time for him to do a lap at the end of qualifying. They gave him a 10-second pit stop during his best performance in Mexico, which completely ruined his race. They set his tire pressures wrong in Vegas, and so there was all these moments of just total incompetence by Red Bull where we never see this with Max Verstappen. I mean, all the operation around Max is just perfect. I mean, that's why he was able to challenge for the title up against an incompetent McLaren. So yeah, that's what I'm going to defend Yuki on, in terms of there was some strange incompetence for some reason on his side of the garage. But either way, his performances just weren't good enough. That's why, in my opinion, he is the second worst driver of 2025. He doesn't deserve to be on the grid. Actually, that's a bit harsh, maybe. I think that in a lower midfield team, he still would deserve to be on the grid, but there is no doubt that his performances didn't warrant another season. And when you look at what Hajar is doing in his rookie season, in a very different car, I might add, there's no doubt that Hajar deserved his chance. So it's just strange, and it's difficult to criticize Yuki's season because, yes, he's not been good enough, but it's a story that we have seen many, many times. Does that mean that he's a useless driver? No. In my opinion, he is still a quality midfield driver. I think he could do a decent job in a midfield team, but you have to judge him on the season that he has produced, and he contributed 7 points and scored, he contributed 7% of the team's total points, scored just 33 points in a car that finished 2 points behind the world champion. We know how difficult that car can be to drive, there is no doubt about it. But yeah, it has been a horrible season by Yuki Tsunoda, and in a way, I guess he doesn't deserve to be on the grid for next season. And last up, coming in at number 1, I have got Jack Doohan. Remember him? He was the guy at Alpine at the beginning of the season who did just 6 races. Now, if any of you watched my I did a video talking about which rookies were under the most pressure, and my number 1 driver going into the season was Jack Doohan. I felt that he was set up to fail from the very beginning. The fact that they brought in Colapinto, the fact that even once Doohan was dropped, he wasn't just not really in the picture for the C. He was basically out of Alpine completely, because all of a sudden it was between Colapinto and Paul Aron for the 2026 seat. Jack Doohan all of a sudden just wasn't even in contention for that seat. So yeah, he was dealt really bad cards in my opinion. And again, doing those 6 races, I actually think that, when you look at his gap to Gasly, it's not too bad, those 6 races, given how inexperienced he was. I think actually, were he to be given the entire season, I think he would have actually done a pretty decent job, maybe something similar to Colapinto. So yeah, how do you judge someone after only 6 races? He did have that really bad crash in Suzuka, where I think he just didn't even bother to turn his DRS off during practice. I think just little things like that, I think really kind of put him on the wrong foot when it comes to the team. Obviously, he didn't score any points. He had 2 DNFs. So yeah, very difficult to judge Jack Doohan's season. In my opinion, he has to be the number 1 because he didn't really achieve anything, but he wasn't really given that many races to even do anything. Oh, and he also had the worst car on the grid as well, just like Franco Colapinto. So yeah, once again, in my opinion, he was set up to fail from the very beginning by Flavio Briatore. And can we really be surprised at how it turned out? In my opinion, no. I do think that maybe potentially he should be given another chance on the grid by another team, because I do think that he has talent. I think he showed some sparks at some point up against Pierre Gasly, but in that car, in his situation, it was going to be almost impossible to hang on to that seat, and definitely impossible to perform miracles in that car. Well, there you have it. Those are my top 5 worst drivers of the 2025 season. As always, let me know your top 5 worst in the comments box down below. And if you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated. And I'll see you in the next one.